On the night of April 21st, 1977, a 17-year-old named Bill Bartlett was driving his Volkswagen down a dark, winding road in the small town of Dover, Massachusetts, with two friends in the car, when his headlights caught something moving along the top of an old stone wall. At first he thought it was a dog, or a cat, something ordinary, climbing the loose stones at the edge of the road. But as his headlights swung fully onto it, and it slowly turned its head to face the light, Bill Bartlett's brain refused, for a second, to accept what his eyes were telling him. It was small, the size of a child. It was hairless. Its skin looked rough, peach-colored, like wet sandpaper. Its body was thin and spindly, with long, delicate fingers that gripped the top of the wall like tendrils. And its head was enormous, far too big for its body. A great, round, watermelon-shaped skull, wobbling on a thin neck. It had no nose that he could see, no mouth, no ears, just that huge, swollen head, and two enormous, round, glowing eyes shining back at him in the headlights like orange glass. Bartlett drove on, shaking. He was an art student, a serious kid, a good kid, and when he got home, still trembling, he did what an artist does. He drew it, and on the sketch, he wrote a line that has followed him for the rest of his life. I, Bill Bartlett, swear on a stack of Bibles that I saw this creature. Now, here's what makes this different from 100 other one-off monster stories. Because if it had ended there, with one frightened teenager and a sketch, we could call it a trick of the light and move on. But it did not end there. 2 hours later, on a different road, a different 15-year-old boy, who had not spoken to Bartlett, who had heard nothing about any of this, came within 15 feet of the same creature, and drew almost exactly the same thing. And the next night, a 15-year-old girl, on a third road, saw it again. 3 sightings, 4 witnesses, about 25 hours, 3 independent drawings that match. And when investigators later plotted the 3 locations on a map of Dover, they fell into an almost perfectly straight line, as though something had walked through that town, in the dark, over 2 nights. They called it the Dover Demon. And I want to be honest with you, right at the top, because this episode is different from most. Usually on this channel, we follow the evidence and we find the ordinary thing hiding underneath the legend. Tonight, we're going to follow the evidence just as hard. And I'm going to be straight with you about where it leads. Because the Dover Demon has never been solved. Not by the believers, and not by the skeptics either. And by the end of tonight, I think you'll understand why this quiet little case, from 1 week in 1977, still refuses to close. Let's go to Dover. Welcome back to the Unexplained Encounters and to Cryptid Legends Investigated. Tonight's case is one of the strangest in American cryptid history. And I'll warn you now, one of the most honestly unsettling. Because it resists every easy answer people have thrown at it for nearly 50 years. To understand why, you have to start with where it happened and who it happened to. Dover, Massachusetts in 1977 was about as far from a spooky place as you can get. It's a small, quiet, wealthy town about 15 or 20 miles southwest of Boston. Leafy, safe, ordinary. Winding country roads, stone walls, patches of woods, a few creeks. The kind of New England town where nothing happens, and everyone likes it that way. This is not a place with a monster tradition. Nobody in Dover was sitting around campfires telling Dover demon stories, because there was no Dover demon, not until 1 week in April. And the witnesses matter even more than the town, because these were not thrill seekers, and they were not attention seekers. They were teenagers, ordinary, local, well-regarded kids. The man who would investigate this case, a cryptozoologist named Loren Coleman, who happened to live nearby, said it plainly after interviewing them. These were good kids. No drugs, no drinking, no previous interest in the paranormal, no history of making things up. Just normal Dover teenagers who, within days, would be interviewed separately, closely, by serious adults, and would each hold to a story that was costing them, not helping them. Because here's the thing about being a teenager who says you saw a monster. It is not fun. It does not make you popular. Bill Bartlett has said, as an adult, that the whole thing was embarrassing, that he sometimes wished he had made it up, because at least then it would make sense. These kids got mocked for years, and they never took it back. Hold on to that, because by the end of tonight, the sincerity of these 4 young people is going to be the single most important piece of evidence we have. So that's the setup. A quiet town with no monster legend. 4 credible, ordinary kids with nothing to gain. And one dark week in April 1977. It starts on Farm Street at about 10:30 at night, with Bill Bartlett behind the wheel of a Volkswagen and 2 glowing eyes on a stone wall. Let's look at exactly what he saw. Let's go back to that first sighting, slowly, and really look at it. Because the details are the whole case, and they're strange in a very specific way. Bill Bartlett is driving north on Farm Street with his 2 friends. It's dark, it's a winding rural road, and his headlights sweep across a low wall of loose stones at the roadside. And he sees a shape on it. His first read is completely ordinary. A dog, maybe a cat, something climbing the wall. That's important. He wasn't primed for a monster. He was expecting an animal. But the shape is wrong. It's moving wrong, climbing the loose stones on all 4s, but with a strange, deliberate, almost clumsy motion. And as his headlights come fully onto it, it turns its head toward the light. And now Bartlett is looking straight at it, close, lit up in his high beams. And every detail he reports is a small wrongness that adds up to something deeply unsettling. The size of a small child, maybe 3.5, 4 feet, completely hairless. The skin rough and peachy. Some said like sandpaper, or the texture of a wet shark. A thin, frail body. Long, thin arms and legs, and long tendril-like fingers wrapping over the stones. And that impossible head, oversized, round, shaped like a watermelon balanced on a thin neck, seeming almost too heavy for the body to hold up. No hair, no visible nose, no mouth, no ears, and 2 huge, round, glowing eyes. Bartlett described them as orange, glowing like 2 marbles catching the light. He didn't stop. Who would? He drove on past it, heart hammering, and when he looked back, it was gone. But the image was burned into him. He went home rattled, and he drew it. And because Bill Bartlett was a genuinely talented young artist, the sketch wasn't a childish scribble. It was a careful, specific rendering of a specific thing, and he swore on it. Literally wrote his oath on the paper. Now, at this exact moment, this is still a story we could explain away. 1 teenager, 1 dark road, 1 strange glimpse. Maybe he saw a sick animal. Maybe the headlights played a trick. If this were the whole case, it would barely be a case. But while Bill Bartlett was at home drawing his creature, about 2 miles away and 2 hours later, the night was not finished with the town of Dover, because another kid was about to walk right up to it. Now, right before I tell you about the second sighting, which is in some ways the most frightening of the 3, I need you to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell, because this is exactly the kind of case this channel exists for. A real documented mystery that neither the believers nor the debunkers have ever managed to close, told honestly. That's rare. This is the newest episode in our Cryptid Legends series, so subscribe and you won't miss where we go next. Go ahead. I'll wait. Later that same night, around midnight, roughly 2 hours after Bartlett, a 15-year-old boy named John Baxter was walking home. He was on a different road, Miller Hill Road, and he had not seen Bartlett, had not heard about any creature, knew nothing about any of it. He was just a kid walking in the dark, and up ahead in the gloom, he saw a figure coming toward him. At first, and this is a chilling detail, he assumed it was someone he knew, a short friend from the neighborhood, walking hunched over. He even, by some accounts, called out to it, but it didn't answer, and it stopped, and so did he. Baxter stood there in the dark, and the figure stood there facing him, and neither moved. And as his eyes adjusted, he realized the shape was all wrong, the head too big, the body too thin, the proportions not human and not any animal he knew. He was, by his account, able to get within about 15 feet of it. 15 feet. Close enough to see it clearly. It was standing near a gully, and he described it as having its feet somehow molded around a rock, with those same long toes or fingers. The same oversized figure. The same wrongness. And then the nerve went out of him, the way it would out of any of us, and John Baxter backed away, carefully, then quickly, and got out of there. And when he was later asked to draw what he'd seen, with no knowledge of Bartlett's drawing, he produced a sketch that was, in its essentials, the same creature. Big head, thin body, long limbs. The stance a little different. Bartlett's was on a wall, Baxter's was upright by a tree, but unmistakably, eerily, the same thing. 2 witnesses now. 2 miles apart. 2 hours apart. No contact between them. 2 matching drawings of a creature that does not exist. And the town of Dover still had 1 more night to go. The next night, April 22nd, a 15-year-old girl named Abby Brabham was riding in a car driven by a friend along a 3rd road, Springdale Avenue. And as they drove, the headlights picked up something crouched or standing near the edge of the road. She got a good look, lit up in the headlights, and she described, independently, again, the same basic creature. The oversized head, the thin body, the glowing eyes, though she added a detail that the others hadn't emphasized and that skeptics would later seize on. She thought the eyes glowed green, where Bartlett had said orange. A small discrepancy. We'll come back to it, because it matters in both directions. But the core was the same. A 3rd teenager. A 3rd road. A 3rd night. A 3rd independent sketch of the same impossible thing. And here is the detail that elevates the Dover demon from a spooky story to a genuine, enduring puzzle. The thing that made serious investigators sit up. When Lauren Coleman and the other investigators mapped the 3 sightings, Bartlett on Farm Street, Baxter on Miller Hill Road, Brabham on Springdale Avenue, the 3 locations fell into a nearly straight line, roughly 2 miles long. A straight line, as if something had moved through the town of Dover, in the dark, over those 2 nights, in a single deliberate direction, following, some noted, the low ground, the creeks and the wet corridors, the way an animal moves through a landscape. Sit with what that means. 3 separate young people, who by all accounts did not coordinate, did not compare notes before drawing, saw the same never-before-seen creature, and their sightings, plotted cold on a map, trace a path. That is not how hoaxes usually work. That is not how a random trick of the light usually works. That is the signature of something that was actually in that town, actually moving through it. The only question, the whole question, is what? And to answer it honestly, we have to do the hard thing. We have to take every ordinary explanation, one by one, as seriously as it deserves. Because plenty of smart people have tried to close this case. Let's see if any of them actually can. So let's be rigorous, the way we always are, and line up the natural explanations. Because there are several, and some of them are genuinely reasonable, and honesty means giving each its best shot. Explanation 1. A foal, or a baby moose. This was the early favorite. A newborn horse or a young moose, awkward and long-legged and big-headed, wandering in the dark. And at first glance it fits the gangly proportions. But it falls apart fast on the specifics. April is not foaling season in Massachusetts. A newborn foal in late April is out of season. There were essentially no moose in eastern Massachusetts in 1977. They were a western part of the state animal, and a yearling moose would have been far bigger than what the kids described, with fur and antler buds. And here's the killer detail. Moose and horses have hooves. Every witness described long, thin fingers, tendril-like digits gripping stone. You cannot get fingers from a hoofed animal. The foal or moose answer, as satisfying as it sounds, does not survive contact with the actual testimony. Explanation 2. A diseased animal. A fox, a dog, a raccoon with advanced mange, hairless, sickly, moving strangely, its skin raw and pale. This is a genuinely good skeptical explanation, and it accounts for the hairlessness and the peachy skin beautifully. Mange really can turn a familiar animal into something monstrous and unrecognizable. But it too strains against the details. The enormous watermelon head, the upright stance Baxter and Brabham described, the long fingers, the sheer size. A mangy fox is small and low. It doesn't stand by a tree like a little person. It's the best of the animal answers, and it still leaves too much unexplained. Explanation 3. And this is the skeptic's strongest. The snowy owl. The veteran investigator Joe Nickel argued the whole thing was a snowy owl, and I want to give this its full due because it's clever. A snowy owl has a big round head and huge forward-facing eyes that blaze in headlights. When it hunches and partly opens its wings, the splayed wingtip feathers could, in theory, look like spindly limbs and long fingers. And its white feathers, lit by the warm yellow headlights of a 1970s car, could read as that peachy skin. It genuinely accounts for the head, the eyes, and the color. It's the most scientifically careful explanation on offer. But even the owl has real problems. An owl perched or hunched does not look like a 4-foot creature standing upright beside a tree, which is what John Baxter described from 15 feet away. It doesn't have long fingers gripping stones. And it asks us to believe that 3 different kids, on 3 different roads, over 2 nights, each independently turned the same owl, or 3 different owls, into the same specific, detailed humanoid creature, and drew matching pictures of it. Possible, but a stretch. And that leaves the explanation that isn't about the creature at all. The one about the kids. Here's the explanation that most serious skeptics ultimately lean on, and it deserves a full and fair hearing because it's the most powerful one of all. And it's not about foals or owls. It's about the human mind. It goes like this. Bill Bartlett saw something on that wall. Maybe a sick animal, maybe an owl, maybe a genuinely unidentifiable glimpse in the dark. That part might be real, but it's 1977. The culture is saturated with aliens. Close Encounters of the Third Kind comes out that very year. The big-headed, big-eyed, gray alien is everywhere. And a strange story, in a small town, travels at the speed of gossip. So the argument is, once Bartlett's sighting started to spread, the other witnesses were primed. They went into their own dark nights, already carrying the shape of the creature in their heads. And when they saw anything ambiguous, their minds supplied the same big-headed, big-eyed figure. And when asked to draw it, they drew what they'd already half heard described. The matching sketches in this reading aren't 3 independent confirmations. They're one story, spreading and reproducing itself in 3 young minds. It's a strong argument. It's probably the best single explanation there is. And I have to tell you, in fairness, the discrepancies actually support it a little. Abby Brabham's green eyes versus Bartlett's orange eyes is exactly the kind of small variation you'd expect if the story was being retold and reshaped rather than independently observed. But, and this channel lives on the word but, it has one serious weakness, and it's a big one. The timing. Because the best evidence suggests these sightings happened close together, over about 25 hours, and that the accounts were largely locked down. The kids interviewed, the sketches drawn, before the story had really spread publicly, which didn't happen until weeks later, in May. Investigators were on this fast, interviewing the witnesses separately, within days. If Baxter genuinely hadn't heard about Bartlett's sighting before his own, and that's what the record indicates, then the contagion explanation loses its foundation for at least the second sighting. You can't be primed by a story you haven't heard yet. So even the strongest skeptical explanation, the one I find most persuasive, has a crack running through it. And that is the strange, honest heart of the Dover demon. Every explanation is reasonable, and every explanation fails on at least one hard detail, which brings us to the only truly honest verdict. And it's not the one either side wants. So what was the Dover demon? Here's where I have to do something I don't get to do very often on this channel, and I want to do it carefully. because usually by this point in an episode, I can tell you what really happened. At Flatwoods, it was a barn owl. At Gévaudan, it was wolves and poverty and print. I follow the evidence, and it lands somewhere solid, and we call it honestly. Tonight, the honest answer is different. The honest answer is, we don't know. And I don't mean that as a cop-out. I mean it as the single most accurate, hard-won conclusion in this entire case. Because I've just walked you through every explanation there is. Foal, moose, diseased fox, snowy owl, mass suggestion, and you saw what happened to each one. They're all plausible, and they all break on some stubborn, specific detail that the witnesses reported and would not take back. The animal answers can't produce the fingers or the upright stance. The owl can't produce the 4-foot creature by the tree. The contagion theory can't explain sightings that happened before the story spread. Every key fits the lock part way, and then jams. And that is a genuinely rare thing. Most unexplained cases aren't really unexplained. They're just under-investigated, and when you dig, the ordinary answer falls out. The Dover demon was investigated fast and hard, and by serious people, and it still didn't fall out. Nearly 50 years later, it sits there, refusing both the believers and the debunkers. Not proven to be a cryptid, not proven to be an alien, but not comfortably solved either. Now, let me be as clear as I've ever been about what we don't know does and does not mean, because this is the whole discipline of this channel. It does not mean therefore aliens. It does not mean therefore a monster. An honest we don't know is not a secret yes. Unidentified means unidentified. It means that on 2 nights in 1977, 4 sober, sincere, ordinary kids saw something they could not explain, and that we, with everything we know, still cannot fully explain it either. That's it. That's the whole, honest, unsatisfying, fascinating truth. And here's why I think this case matters, and why it stays with people. Because everything ultimately rests on those 4 young witnesses, and they are the strongest part of the whole story. They were credible. They were consistent. They had nothing to gain, and years of mockery to lose. And nearly half a century later, not one of them has ever taken it back. Bill Bartlett grew up, became a professional artist, a serious grown man, and he still says, quietly, that he saw what he saw, that he didn't make it up, and that sometimes he wishes he had, because a made-up monster would be so much easier to live with than a real memory you can't explain. I believe him. Not that it was an alien. I have no evidence of that, and neither does anyone else. But that he saw something, real and strange and unexplained, on a stone wall on Farm Street, on a spring night in 1977. 4 kids saw something walk through their town. We have spent nearly 50 years unable to say what. And the bravest, most honest thing this channel can do is not force an answer that isn't there, but to sit with them in that not knowing and admit that some doors, once opened on a dark road, never quite close again. The Dover demon is one of the most quietly unsettling cases in American cryptid history. Not because it's the loudest, but because it's the one that won't resolve. Over about 25 hours in April 1977, 4 ordinary, credible teenagers in Dover, Massachusetts, independently saw the same impossible creature. Small, hairless, an oversized head, glowing eyes, long tendril fingers. 3 sightings, 3 matching sketches, plotted in a straight line across town. And the honest investigation lands somewhere rare. Every natural explanation, a foal, a moose calf, a diseased fox, a snowy owl, a story spreading between frightened kids, is reasonable. And every one of them breaks on some specific detail the witnesses reported and never recanted. This is not proof of an alien. It is not proof of a monster. But it is a genuine, stubborn, still open mystery, carried entirely by the credibility of 4 young people who had nothing to gain and never took it back. Unidentified means unidentified. Not alien, not solved. Just the honest, uncomfortable truth. 4 kids saw something in Dover in 1977, and nearly 50 years later, nobody, believer or skeptic, has been able to say for certain what it was. Hit that like button if you'd rather have an honest, "we don't know," than a comfortable answer that doesn't fit. Subscribe to the Unexplained Encounters and tap the notification bell, because Cryptid Legends Investigated continues every week. And tonight's comment question, a real one. Which explanation do you find most convincing? The snowy owl? The diseased animal? The story spreading between the kids? Or do you think 4 sincere teenagers really did see something on those roads that we still can't name? And has a group of people you trust ever all seen the same strange thing and never been able to explain it? Tell me below. I read every single one. I'll see you next week. Sleep well.